Listen up.
Welcome to the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast, your weekly podcast for everything PowerShell community. Today, we're going to be talking about Azure M365 and all kinds of other cool stuff. I'm going to give a plug to a very cool community event coming up, PowerShell Saturday NC. Check it out at PowerShellSaturdayNC.com. It's $75. You can check out the interview last week with Phil Bossman, where we talk all about it. It'll be a good opportunity to learn some PowerShell for the budget conscious and those in the North Carolina area or the Research Triangle area. Want to shout out to the PowerShell Pro Tips on Custom Objects that I released. If you don't know, that's a PowerShell YouTube series that I have about once a month. I share a new pro tip. Some cool stuff coming there. I think we're releasing a new one for next week. So next week I'll have something else to plug. Also want to say, shout out to my Twitch. I'm going to start streaming on Twitch a little bit behind the scenes, maybe as I prepare for talks or for the podcast. I'm giving a talk tomorrow, so that'll be last week. And I'll be sharing a little bit behind the scenes in preparation for that. Good chance to connect, communicate, and ultimately have some fun. So that's at Andrew Platek on Twitch. Subscribe, because in the future I will be streaming podcasts live as I record them. Going to test out how that goes. It'll be cool to get some audience interaction potentially. Sometimes people have different perspectives and interesting questions or pivot points that they can add in the chat, and I can thusly read them and potentially pivot. For the blogs of the week, there's been a couple of good ones. Shout out to psweekly.doust.dev. That's PowerShell Weekly by Matthew Doust. Very cool wrap up of everything in the community. And one of them that I saw, well, I actually saw this from Dan Schroeder's Twitter, but Dan Schroeder has a new article, a PowerShell function to easily retry any code. So maybe you're writing some code and need to retry it. See what Dan has to say. Use that as a starting point. Mike freaking Robbins, that's what the F stands for, has a new post. Find paired Azure region locations with Azure PowerShell. And he does know a thing or two about Azure PowerShell. In case you haven't noticed, check out the interviews with him. All right, Chrissy Lemaire we had a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and there is an accompanying blog post to what we talked about, which is PDF text to SQL data using OpenAI's structured output. Pretty sweet. If you listen to the podcast, you were interested and you want to see more practical uses of AI, I dig that, which pivots nicely into the next blog post, which is from our very own guest of the day, Bradley Wyatt. He did a post on leveraging OpenAI to enhance pull request management in Azure DevOps. And that's right. It's time for our guest to join us on the podcast. That's Bradley Wyatt, 5 times Microsoft MVP in Azure and M365, newly in M365, which is cool. He blogs at The Lazy Administrator. You've probably seen him around, thelazyadministrator.com. Been around for a very long time, the type of person who I've seen online, and I can't tell when I've seen them in person because I've seen them online so much. They're all over the place. Bradley, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Andrew. Longtime listener. So it's very exciting to kind of be on here for the first time.
Yeah, I'm glad I nailed you down. I've been kind of poking away a little bit, seeing when you're interested. So we nailed it, and we're here now. But I want to go back because your name might catch people a little bit off guard. The Lazy Administrator. So where did this come from?
So I wanted a blog name where it wasn't my name. I really didn't want people to be able to correlate the blog with me. When I first created the blog, I didn't have like an about me or anything, so it was just strictly my write-ups. But I think I had a couple ideas, administrator and everyone, obviously for IT, and then for lazy, I always went with this mentality that PowerShell enabled me to do things because I'm lazy. I don't want to be able to, sit there and click and point. So I think I went to like a website name generator or company name generator, and I got it from there.
Nice. So it's kind of like the origin story of like those bands. You just pick a random name from the internet. I've been in those bands. The Lazy Administrator. It sticks. It kind of hits. And it's a point that I've talked about before, the whole lazy thing. It's not necessarily, if you have the right approach and you're lazy, that means you're going to do things the right way the first time and then not have to do it again, which is better and smarter in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of these things, if I ever have to do anything technical more than once, I'm always looking for a way to automate it to see if I could save that time and do something else with it.
So where does automation versus documentation fall for you? Because I found for me, sometimes things aren't maybe automatable in the way that I'd like to be. So my solution is to document it so I don't have to use any brain space and can maybe pass that task off to somebody else. But where are you with the automation versus documentation thing?
So I'm always thinking of an automation first. I'm always seeing what I can automate and how I can automate it. If I come up, let's say, and I find that I can't automate something, then I'm looking at, okay, let me document it, because it's just not there yet. If the technology's not there, if it's not possible with whatever APIs you're working with, then I'm going at a purely documentation standpoint. But my goal is to not do the documentation and hand off the task to someone else, so to speak.
I like that approach. Now, let's go back in the day a little bit. Before you were into automating things, what were you working on before you kind of get the PowerShell and automation bug?
So I have just about my entire IT career has been with PowerShell. And so I started with Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, and I got a student job working for the internal IT department. And, they have to have so many student workers, I guess. And so we were doing tasks that we weren't interfacing with production all the time, but they're really more learning experiences. And this is my first job. I'm like 18 years old. And my boss at the time gave me this task, and we were essentially moving users from one legacy Active Directory infrastructure to another one. And my task was, I think I had 2 weeks to do it. And he wanted to be able to replicate the whole OU structure. He wanted to replicate, the users and group memberships. And at the time, it's fresh out of high school, I had taken Visual Basic. So I went that approach. But one of my coworkers had steered me into, and pointed me into the direction of PowerShell. And that was my first, I'd never heard of it. That was early PowerShell days where you had to import the module before you had to work with it, load it into memory. But it was great. And you probably still can still find some of my TechNet articles where I obviously have no idea what I'm talking about, where some people are piecemealing some, PowerShell code, and I'm able to comprehend what it's doing, but not necessarily understand how to write it. And it's funny because I think one of my old coworkers found it and brought it up, and you can definitely tell I don't know what I'm talking about.
Wow. So you kind of were fortunate to have a little bit of exposure to VBS and then transition into a role that it sounds like a pretty good learning opportunity type role for a first IT job.
Yeah, it was nothing but learning. Every single task was a learning experience, like I said, and you weren't pressured for timelines. If I couldn't get it done in 2 weeks, it wasn't a big deal. I did have to answer to my boss at the time, but it wasn't, it's not like you're a high salary employee or anything like that. You're going to have the job at the end of the day, but it was a great learning opportunity. And I just realized how great PowerShell was early on. And every job since then, I've just tried to use it more and more and more. And that's kind of how I've gone through it.
And did you end up finishing school? You have that job the whole way through, or what happened with that?
So I ended up dropping out. My parents had allocated, I'm a triplet, so my parents had allocated so much money per kid. Yeah. So I ran out of my funds. So I was like, all right, I can either, take out a bunch of loans and continue down this track. But I saw that IT was more, it's just so fast moving that if I were to get a degree, we're learning everything that's old by the time I get the degree. So I dropped out, and I ended up getting my first job at a managed services provider down there and working with PowerShell even more.
That is exciting. Fellow dropout, let's go. Turn to PowerShell success story. That's cool. I mean, and I agree with what you've said that, like, are you going to learn the latest and greatest in Azure in modern college classes? Probably not. You're going to be learning old technology, and that's what I found. And even some of the practices weren't always up to date. But like with PowerShell, if you're able to bring value, automate things, you're able to like get a pretty solid earning potential in your career. And it's fortunate that you found out that PowerShell thing early, because it took me a few years of kind of just messing around at help desk and sysadmin roles, not doing things the appropriate way before I sort of had my eyes open. But here we are. And I think a lot of people listening to us right now might be in similar shoes where they're trying to figure out where their career is going to go. And it's nice to have examples like you to follow. But a triplet, that is unique. I'm sure you've gotten this a lot in your life, but I don't know if I've ever met another triplet.
Yeah, it's, when you go to school or you start a new job and they say, oh, tell us something interesting about you. all of us, because I have two sisters, we've all used it at everything. And then everyone's always like, wow, that's crazy. And, to us, it's not crazy because we've grown up with it. And, but yeah.
It's like being super tall. It's like, oh yeah, I got to answer these same basic questions again.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Wow. Well, you might be the only triplet in the PowerShell community that I know of. So that is pretty exciting.
Well, nice. Unfortunately, I don't think there's an award for that, but if there is, I'm willing to take it.
You're the one. You might have to split it 3 ways, but hopefully it's still something.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting. So you got that exposure to PowerShell, then you dropped out, got a job at an MSP, which is, from what I hear, another amazing learning opportunity type job where you get a lot of hands-on experience at a pretty fast pace. How long did you live that MSP life?
I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years, which at that time when I'm young, it felt like forever. And I left that job because I felt like I had learned everything. The clientele in rural Southern Illinois were small. So, not very complex networks or anything. And I really rose through the ranks, starting at the help desk. And we weren't a huge company by any means, but starting at the help desk and then really kind of running a lot of the projects and things like that. But I felt like I had learned it all. And I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm ready for the next best thing. So, me and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, we were trying to figure out where we wanted to make our next move. So I had left that job to go towards another MSP to try to, lay ourselves in an area and get settled.
And then did you end up settling at the next spot?
No. So, we went to Kansas City, which I thought was great. I went to another managed services that focused a lot on the healthcare, which I don't know. I really hated the healthcare industry. It's very, very, I don't like the ERPs and the applications that they use are complex. And a lot of the times it was a lot calling vendors and holding hands. But the people in Kansas City were great. I went to a couple, I think a PowerShell meetup. And, at the time they were calling themselves a Silicon Prairie because they had the Google Fiber there. So there was just a big, healthy tech organization. So, but no, to answer your question, I moved over there and then my wife decided to go back towards the Chicagoland area. And I was like, all right. So I started looking for another managed service private provider in the Chicagoland area. I really just moved MSPs to MSPs, it seems.
Nice. So you get a lot of exposure to different things. Now, as you're working your way up at that first MSP, were there any key automation projects that you worked on or that you remember standing out as like, okay, this is a big challenge and I can do this, and then afterwards having some success?
Nothing crazy because I'm still really early in my PowerShell days. A lot of the projects that we were doing there were more standing up domain controllers or modifying a bunch of users. So I was in and out of the Active Directory module day in and day out. And I had a lot of scripts, modifying users, adding users, removing users, things that they don't sound super complex. They're probably not the greatest script you've ever seen, but, it really got myself learning the structure on how to do it, logging, error catching, things like that. So, and from there, just working my way up.
That's exciting. And so you kind of learned PowerShell, you came up with it. When did you start blogging and making that choice to do public stuff? Was that early on or was that already after you felt pretty accomplished?
It was after I felt pretty accomplished. I actually had a blog because the reason I did my original blog, I made just like a knowledge base, and everything I did with this managed service provider, I put it in this knowledge base, and that grew and grew and grew, but from there, I had to get rid of that blog for other reasons, and I still wanted to blog. I really, I've grown my career from other people's blogs. I see everyone else doing it, and I just wanted to kind of give back to the community, especially when you get yourself in your career because of all these public blogs. I wanted to contribute as well. So that was the reason why I set up the Lazy Administrator. I wanted to contribute, but I wanted to not just create 100 blogs of everything I was doing, which is what I was doing prior. I wanted to kind of give myself a niche, and I wanted an exact reason. So when I started the Lazy Administrator, I wanted the blogs to only be things that I felt, in my opinion, were very blog worthy, things that took me a long time to do that, would help a lot of other people, because reading the blog and setting it all up would take considerably less time than if you were to create it yourself. So I created myself a bar that I had to have, whatever article I wanted to get over that threshold, and kind of position myself in a unique area, so to speak.
I like that. I have long told people that, like, you got to do blogs somehow, even if you just approach it as a personal KB of sorts. Start off that way, perfectly fine. You don't ever have to go beyond it, but oftentimes we see people who get started and okay, now they're blogging, they've gotten past those hurdles, and now they can focus on giving back and focus on using their skills that they've developed over the years to actually solve big problems, and it scales really well. A bunch of people read the blogs. And like you're saying, all they got to do is just kind of read my paragraphs and copy my code, and they can get 95% of the way there, or a lot of times 100% of the way. That's huge. And I think that as professionals who are working our way up our careers and getting these skills, we should all aim to provide our skills in a way that kind of scales. Whether that's modules, whether that's blogging, or whatever you're doing, you got to give back.
Yeah, I saw, it was another developer, I'm forgetting her name. I think she's from the Chicagoland area, but she had a really good write-up, and basically her advice, because I think she's management or something at this point, but her advice was, as you move up the corporate ladder, your goal is to pull other people up with you. You're not trying to, take people down as you climb the corporate ladder. You're trying to pull everyone else up as you kind of progress up. So that's really stuck with me. And that's kind of been my goal, is to pull others as I go up the quote unquote corporate ladder.
Yeah. And how have you had any experiences where you hear from somebody who like really enjoyed a blog and it helped them out? Have you gotten any good vibes that way?
So every time I've changed jobs, I have always had people, because they'll always make an announcement, and then I'll always have people reach out to me on Teams or email, and they say, "Hey, I read your blog a long time ago, or I'm always on your blog. This article really helped me out, and I love it." Even though I get a ton of that, I absolutely love hearing when people are using it and finding something beneficial and helping with their day to day. I even had one at my current company where, so way back in the day, I created this huge GUI tool in PowerShell Studio that did just a wide variety of different things. And I coded everything, but I made a nice little GUI in front of it. And I ended up selling that, which is no longer, I'm no longer selling that, just because the functionality in M365 has gotten there. But back they reached out to me when I started this new job, and they're like, "Man, we bought this," and they showed me the receipt from 10 years ago or something like that. And I was like, wow, it's crazy to see and hear other people that are able to see what I'm doing and use what I'm, putting out there in the world, and they're finding it beneficial and helping them in their job.
It's pretty sweet. It doesn't get much better than that. Like, to be at that part of your career where you're not only, taking care of yourself, having a job, doing a good job there, but you're able to create connections with other people, maybe across the entire world, and be an asset to them and sort of be growing alongside many other people in the community. It's pretty sweet, man. It's just so wild to me that we get to enjoy a career like this.
It's also cool because I've been working with a couple of people in the PowerShell community. Kevin Tiegler, I've worked with him. Another one whose name I'm forgetting, but you see these people from afar, and Kevin Tiegler, I hold him up really, really high, and I'm and then they'll reach out to me, and we'll both be, let's say, working on something, or he'll have a question or I'll have a question. So it's crazy that you hold these people in such high regard, and then everyone's just so approachable and easy to work with. So it's fantastic.
It has been interesting too, doing this podcast. I get to talk to a lot of people that I look up to, and they're all, demystified. They are no longer wizards and warlocks. They are very much people just like you and I and everyone listening, who just, they decided to sort of embrace their careers and take it a certain direction. And anyone can do that. You just need to put in the time. And ultimately, they still have the same flaws and kind of same human things that we all do. But to me, it is encouraging, because I feel like, oh, these are just normal people. I'm just normal people. I can do cool thing too. And you kind of using that as the confidence. But that's cool, Kevin. Yeah, Cyberdrain, right?
Yes, Kelvin. Yeah, he's got that Cyberdrain improved partner portal now, which is crazy. I hear just the best things about it, which good for him. He's really created a really good product.
Yeah, I met him and one of, I guess, his head developer at a conference, and definitely cool. They definitely enjoy PowerShell over there, and it's interesting to see now, PowerShell, I guess, started as a certain thing, but it is just a tool that you apply to a domain. And seeing all these different domains across the world that have like a PowerShell background, but they're also sort of their own communities that take advantage of PowerShell.
Yes.
So it's a wide world of PowerShell.
Yeah, I love it.
That is exciting. Do you have any blogs in particular that speak to you that you're like, okay, I'm proud of this one? Whether it was like at the time it was super helpful, or for you it was really challenging and you were like very relieved to get it over with. Are there any blogs that kind of stand out?
Man, I wish I never remember all my blogs. That's the whole reason why I'm blogging in the first place.
Yes.
The one thing I will say, if my keyboard would work, but apparently not. The one thing I will say is every blog that I've done where I'm like, this is a great blog. It took me a long time. I think this is one that's going to go huge. And then I watch the Google Analytics behind it. And it never does. The ones that I spend, I think, the most time, I guess it doesn't fill as big of a need, I would say. And the ones where I'm like, oh, this is pretty not trivial, but this is pretty. I understand this very well. I don't think this blog will do very well. It'll go crazy, and people will share it all online everywhere. And I'll watch the Google Analytics, and there's tons of people on it. And I'm like, man, it's crazy to think. But for which I don't know. I don't even remember all the blogs I've done, to be completely honest. It's just.
I hear that. It's one of my most popular blogs was about like customizing the colors in iTerm 2 or something like that, like some random kind of off the wall thing. But apparently it hit search terms or something like that way more than any other blog. And it was like a throwaway, which I mean, I'm glad people enjoyed it. But the ones that I put the most effort in were definitely not the most appreciated. But you help one or two people, and that really makes up for the time investment.
Yes.
You could help 1 to 2, or it could go up to thousands potentially, or tens of thousands if it's the right blog. Just sweet.
Yeah, I always like seeing that. And like you said, if you can at least help one person, it's worth the time and effort.
Yep. And it's a pretty low barrier because you'd be surprised. People are looking for this stuff. And it is hard. Like the type of content that bloggers address, tech bloggers who solve problems, is often very helpful and a little bit more niche than what you could expect a vendor to write blogs on. At least from what I've seen. I mean, we're in the Microsoft space, so we see a lot of stuff that they do. And oftentimes the people who are writing blogs on how to use Azure functions and use them in a certain way, that perspective resonates a lot more with me than just reading the docs. Docs have their place, and it is very helpful to have some good docs. But like seeing the actual practical application through the minds of someone who's doing this stuff is very helpful. All right.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the best things about blogs is, like you said, the real world examples, but also sometimes the documentation contains no images. And I'm a visual learner, and I want to see what you're seeing when you're doing that.
Yep. And, by having the excuse of I have to write this blog, it gives you, at least for me, a more structured means of learning something. If it's just me, a lot of times I'll just learn enough to solve the problem, write the script for it, and move on. Whereas when I have to write a blog about it and I write a sentence about something, I have to actually verify that I know that sentence is accurate. It leads to me having a little bit more of a knowledge. Then again, as soon as I publish the blog, I tend to move on mentally and forget it all anyways. But I can always come back and refer to it, which is the benefit of that type of thing. All right.
Yeah, when I'm writing the blogs, I first do it, to make sure that my end goal works, and then because I'm writing the blog, I do it again. So I have to learn it even more. And one of my goals when I'm writing my blogs is I want anyone to be able to go in there and understand it, how to do it, step by step by step. So in all my blogs, I try to provide screenshots and understanding so you can follow it step by step. Because the worst thing that happens to me is if you go to some article and they kind of glance over, they're like, oh, click this, click that, you should be over here. But let's say the Azure portal has changed and you're like, well, I'm lost now. So you're right. I'm when I'm forced to create the blog, or when I do want to create a blog post about something, it makes me try to understand it a lot more. And because, if someone asks me questions about something, I want to be able to pretend that I know what I'm talking about.
That's what we all do. We all pretend, and we do know a little bit behind the scenes, but yeah. All right. Job interviews. How often is the lazyadministrator.com coming up? How much is your public work that you do coming up compared to, just the resume and things you've done on the job?
When I'm applying for jobs, I left it out entirely until like 2 jobs ago. I didn't know how it would be perceived. But all my old coworkers and friends were like, you got to put it on there, So I actually did change my email on there to be, Brad at thelazyadministrator.com. I do have it in there, and it's worked really well. A lot of times, even hiring managers, people that aren't day to day in the technical weeds, they even know it. So they've seen it in their day to day. So it's worked really well. It's a name that's bigger than mine, so it works well.
I think that was the idea, right? Kind of keep yourself on the low and the lazy administrator on top, and then you can kind of mystify them when you say, haha, I am the lazy administrator.
Yeah. So it's worked out. I do enjoy it, and I reap those benefits that I can.
Get that money, baby. So as you're doing interviews, does it come up as a conversation piece, or does it just kind of help you give the impression of somebody who knows how to communicate, knows how to solve problems at the top level, right? Because it doesn't really get much better than doing things visibly, Microsoft MVP, all that stuff. There's only so much better practice you can do.
I would say the biggest benefit that the blogging has really done is I skip, I would say, a lot of the technical questions because I already put myself out there. They can go on my blog and see exactly what I'm working on and that I do know what I'm talking about. So in my experience doing a lot of these interviews, I don't really have a ton of technical questions anymore. It's more, we're just trying to see if we're a culture fit.
It's a good spot to be, especially with the dropping out of college thing. That's a big thing I tell people who are in that boat. It's like, get your technical skills, but also you have to be able to prove it. And having something like a blog can give them that reassurance that you know what you're talking about and can communicate and do things and get things done. So having GitHub, public stuff, for me, it's a game changer. If I see someone apply for a job and I'm on the hiring board, I give them a plus if I see a blog and technical stuff on it.
I would too. I would agree. And like you said, communication, and I think the next step post blog, getting yourself out there like you're doing with this podcast, or if you're speaking at a conference, things that I'm still extremely nervous about. That puts you in another, you are one step further because then you're showing that you're able to communicate things, you're able to train other people. So I would agree that if I don't do any kind of hiring, but if I did see a blog or someone does public speaking, that would add points to it.
What advice would you have for someone who's earlier in their career? They're like, oh, I'm doing things. They have a job. Maybe they want to start blogging, or maybe they don't even have a job and they're just trying to get their foot started. What advice would you have to them for blogging?
For blogging, get yourself out there first. I would have to say, like I did, try to find your niche, what makes you stand out. The two things, like I said with mine, I wanted anyone to be able to look at my blog and be able to follow it super easily, be able to understand it. And the other one was I wanted something to be blog worthy. If I were to make a blog about how to connect to Office 365 using PowerShell, there's thousands and thousands of blogs out there. It's not going to make you stand out. But my advice for anyone starting in their career with blogging and looking into that, one, get yourself out there. I think that's the biggest hurdle. I was very fearful because if you post something like, let's say on Reddit, people will grill you. And it's scary. It's scary to put yourself out there and to, get that feedback. But it just makes you better at your job. I think it makes you a better person as you're kind of growing off of it. But just take that first step. I would say the first step's the hardest step, but it's also the most important step.
Yep. And I'd say that, to your point about don't do a blog that everyone's ever done or that everyone's already done. I think that I agree with that long term, but short term, whatever gets that first post up there, because it is the hardest to do the first one. Trust me, nobody cares. The first few, you don't have to imagine like you're this professional musician releasing, this well thought out album. You just get some stuff out there. And as time goes on, maybe in 6 months, you don't really enjoy that first post, you can cull it and, focus on the higher quality stuff that kind of meets your vision of what you're trying to share.
Yeah, that's good thing to note. It also helps your writing style, your blogging skills as well. So that's a good idea.
And if anyone out there ever you publish that first blog post, send it over to me. I will plug that bad boy on the podcast and perhaps on socials. So always happy to do that. And it fires me up to see people get started blogging because to me, it indicates the first part of a journey that could lead to really amazing things. But at the very least, it leads to good things. I've never seen it not lead to good things for people.
Yeah, I would agree. There's really no downside.
Pivot here. How do you identify tasks that are ripe for automation?
Really, anything where I can see that I'm doing it. I'd have to say one, if I know that being in this field for so long, I know which tasks can be automated just because I've done it before. I know that there's a module for it. But when let's say if I have a new task, I'm trying to see how often we're doing it. If we're going to do this more than once, it's going to probably be up there in priority for automation. Also, how long is it taking to do manually? So right now, at my current job, to understand where priority is for automation, we take tasks that people are asking us to do, and those are our key metrics here is how often are we doing this per year, per quarter, how many engineers could be doing said task, and how long is it taking to do manually. And we're kind of getting a number on how many hours we're saving annually, and that's kind of how we're weighing things right now.
Okay. So are you measuring business impact of what you're doing? Like, are you focused on automation type stuff and maybe you keep like a running list of all the tasks you've automated and how many hours it's saved? Are you really in that world or just in that world to justify the initial automation investment?
Um, probably the latter, to understand the investment. And right now in my day to day, things can be client facing and things can be helping the engineers in their day to day. We just want to know, how much of their time they're dedicating to a task that could be automated and how often they're doing it. But yeah, really, we're to create our work items and our backlog. That's our quantifiable numbers that we're kind of basing our decisions off of.
What were some of the challenges you faced when learning PowerShell?
Um,
Because you had VBS
would,
background, right?
yes, and I hated it. I would say I wasn't very good. Why I like PowerShell is everything is object oriented, and it's been a really long time. But I thought Visual Basic wasn't like that. But I just really didn't like the syntax, and some things weren't made with VBS. You had to you had to ensure that it supported VBS. But I would have to say the hardest part was, I learned it on my day to day, and I learned it as I was going along. But I needed to take some time and dedication and do PowerShell in a month of lunches was probably the biggest thing that got me to my next level, because I understood PowerShell, at a basic level, or what I thought was probably an advanced level at the time. But then you read PowerShell in a month of lunches, and I learned that these things are called properties. And I learned that these are called, functions, things that I understood what they were, but I didn't know what they were called, or I didn't know how to do other things. And that really set me up for success, taking some time out, and it's really well structured, month of lunches. But that really got me to the next level.
Have you always been driven? Because I feel like there's a lot of people out there who don't realize that they can go somewhere else with their careers and actually have a invigorating career, and they just kind of check in every day. But you sound like you're working on books, you're working on growing as an individual and a professional. Has that always been a thing, or where does that come from for you?
I would say, growing up, two sisters, we were all really, really competitive. We always had to be in a sport, some of us multiple sports. So growing up, we were always competitive. But I would also add that, being a dropout, everyone else had that degree to fall back on. And I just had to always ensure that I could keep proving myself and to get to that next level. I would say the hardest part after dropping out was getting my first job, because someone has to take a leap of faith on you. I didn't have that much of a background at all. And then from going with that first job, I had to keep proving myself, because everyone else was able to do it in the classroom over the course of 4 years. And I feel that I have to continuously do that to prove myself.
And I'll say, if you're out there, dropout sounds a little sad. Some of the smartest people I know found themselves in that situation where it wasn't really engaging enough. It wasn't really calling to them, and they'd rather just show up to the job and do it. So similar to you, I dropped out as soon as I got an internship. I got a $10 an hour internship for like 20 hours a week. And I did school a little bit, but afterwards I got hired full time, and I was completely done, because I could learn so much more on my own on the job compared to like dedicating years to learning stuff that's not going to help that much. I mean, maybe I'll get like a small raise from it or something like that, but I like to own my career and own what you're doing and really get involved in that way, which is pretty fun. So if you're out there, you're not alone. We're here with you.
Yeah, I would agree.
So what do you want from your career now? Like, I guess before that, let's compare your thoughts of what an IT career could look like and what you're experiencing now. What is different?
Um, when I first got into IT, I would say the whole industry was different in regards to, we had an exchange administrator, we had a network engineer and a network admin, and these things are all getting consolidated now. Where jack of all trades, master of none, though. But we're having engineers today that know networking and know scripting, and they know exchange admin. So instead of just these specialties, it's getting more broader. But the other thing that I would say is, in regards to PowerShell especially, is I think it's beneficial because I see the industry moving more into things like infrastructure as code, or Azure DevOps, where you're doing CI/CD pipelines and you're kind of the liaison between developers and operations people. So I see the industry moving more towards now where people are more with a developer mindset, and they're able to script and automate and do things instead of point and click. But who knows? I could be totally wrong.
I think it's really fun to get those people who are newer in their careers and have like a little bit of coding background and are able to just get up and running so fast. I have worked with a few where I'm able to introduce them to PowerShell, sometimes for the first time, kind of give them some handrails and get them started, but then give them a bunch of tasks and they're able to run with it. Not saying that people in different times couldn't, but just like the number of that I've kind of seen increase over the years. It's pretty cool and reassuring. Also, to your point, gosh, I think that you do need to know a lot to get into IT comfortably, right? You need to know what a lot of different things do, which maybe in the past, like you're saying, it was more consolidated. But I mean, especially for security roles, you need to be aware of so many things, even if you don't have like a ton of experience, that can make it pretty challenging, but worth it.
Yeah, it's crazy the amount of knowledge you need to continuously keep and hold and continue learning, especially. So I'm jealous of all those. Like my wife is an accountant, and I'll be training at night sometimes, but the accounting stuff doesn't change as often. It do change, but I find myself continuously blogging, Pluralsight, reading books, things like that. So
you got to, and it helps when you can find a good learning schedule that works for you, because factors in your life are going to change, and having some kind of consistency in that area is going to serve you well long term. Even if it's not 10 hours a day, right? That's not really possible, but find out whatever works for you.
Yeah, a little bit here and there. It all adds up.
I want to ask you, so you wrote a blog recently, leveraging OpenAI to enhance pull request management in Azure DevOps. So entry point, what were you using AI in terms of Azure DevOps, like as part of the pull request? What were you using it for in that blog?
So what that one does is, when I do a new pull request in Azure DevOps, it triggers a workflow, which just talks to an Azure function. And the Azure function essentially is then reaching back out to Azure DevOps, and the workflow sends me the pull request ID. And I'm going back into Azure DevOps and saying, give me all the commits associated to this pull request, and then send all the commit messages over to OpenAI. And I forget the exact prompt, but I made a prompt that said, please write me a pull request. I have X amount of commits in this pull request that changed these files, and here are all the messages with each file. And then I take that and I write the pull request, only because I was doing a lot of pull requests, and I was hating writing all the messages. And really what I was doing a lot of the times was I was kind of creating my own pull request message, copying and pasting it over to ChatGPT, and then, changing that a little bit and then pasting it back over. So I was like, you know what, I need to just skip the middleman here and make it so it does it all automatically.
And so just in like the step output of the CI/CD pipeline, you're able to get the text there?
So it's not a CI/CD pipeline. I was going to go that route, but in Azure DevOps, you could just set up a workflow that automatically gets triggered. It's similar to like a webhook, essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it is like a webhook, but I did it that way instead, and so then it cost me $0 to actually run, and once that goes.
I love Azure Functions. I am such a stan. They're so cool, especially if you know PowerShell. It really gives you such a fun insertion point or a pivot point to do different things. And you can call it through all different kinds of ways, and it's so affordable.
Yeah, I would agree. I love them. I probably was making them more than I should. For some things it probably can just be an Azure runbook, and I was making Azure functions, which I've now honed back. But I love making Azure functions, and then it's similar to like an API. You can call it, and then it can return stuff to you. And I'm like, oh man, this is crazy. I love it.
So helpful. If you have not interacted with Azure Functions, I highly recommend it. It's going to change what you're able to do with PowerShell, potentially in a way where you can solve a problem that you couldn't otherwise. Having that kind of pivot point in the cloud that you can call through a REST API is so helpful. And you don't have to be like a master of that. You can still know what you know, modify what you know in PowerShell just a little bit to be able to create this Azure function, and then start taking advantage of pretty complicated stuff. If you were to write it from scratch, it would be a lot of code. But we just rely on Azure Functions, pretty affordable, and we can do it on the low. Love that.
Yeah.
So where do you see where do you see AI being helpful in the world that you're in? Do you see commit messages, or where does your head go to?
I don't see it necessarily doing people's jobs. I think everyone's scared right now that it's going to take their jobs, and it could go that route. I don't really see it. I think it just is another tool in our toolbox of things that can help us do our jobs, especially things that maybe you don't like doing. So right now in my day-to-day, like I said, I have it writing my pull request messages automatically, the description and the title. We also want, and I see it in different PSAs where, let's say, in MSPs, we're having ticketing platforms. It's able to analyze the ticket, give you some guesses on what you should do. Maybe send something to the client. I see it more as a tool. I use it a lot. GitHub Copilot works really well, but you still need to understand PowerShell. You still need to understand the basics, because I could have it write me a script, and the script will do 80% of the thing that I want it to do, but then it's not doing the rest. Or you have to be very specific with your prompts, because it's not able to think about things that you might be thinking about because you've done it before. It's very black and white, so it doesn't know. So I see it more as a tool.
I agree. And I've seen talks at different conferences about using AI if you're a beginner at PowerShell. And I think that, like you're saying, it can be dangerous and anti-productive sometimes, because rather than spending time learning the PowerShell that you need to solve a task, you end up just trying random stuff, deleting random lines, not actually learning anything in order to get some code that, like you said, is 80% of the way there. And so you're not really actually learning much. Whereas if you were to solve it on your own, maybe it would take longer, but you would actually be able to think in that way. And the next time when you go to prompt AI, you can prompt it in a way that will ensure that X, Y, and Z are accounted for, because you understand the domain a little bit more. Because for me, prompting is easy once you know PowerShell.
Yeah, it's those little things you have to think about, that, like I said, that AI is just not able to account for. It's a good learning tool, though, because when you ask it to write you a PowerShell script to do X, Y, and Z, it comments like crazy. So you're able to kind of break it down and understand what it's doing. But on the other side of it, if you take like GitHub Copilot and VS Code and you right-click something and you say, fix this, but there's nothing wrong with it, it'll fix it, thinking that there's something wrong, but there's nothing inherently wrong with it at all. And it'll just keep doing that and doing that and doing that. So you still have to know PowerShell.
I do love how if you feed it some code and tell it to break it down for you, it does do a pretty good job with that, I've seen. Because it's one line at a time, it's relatively apparent what's going on. That approach, I think, is pretty cool. And, I'm curious to see how it transforms the learning process over time. And I think that if you do know PowerShell, AI only makes you more powerful, but you want to make sure you understand a certain amount of PowerShell before you just rely on being an AI PowerShell person, because it can lead you astray.
Yeah, don't just have it write you scripts blindly and then throw it into prod.
I mean, I'm sure there are some that are doing that.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Just based on the numbers. Awesome. Well, you've answered all my questions so far. So good job, Bradley. But I have a few more for you. What is one time something went wrong while on the job, and how did you handle it?
I'll probably give you a non-technical answer.
Okay.
I have, like anyone else, I make mistakes, for technical wise, and, it's all the same at the end of the day. But I would say probably when something went wrong, when I was young in my career and I had a help desk job and I just started at this new company, I had a ticket come through and it ended up being cryptoware. and the whole entire client was cryptoed, and they were locked down. Nobody could work. Yada yada yada. So I stayed overnight at this new job, this new office, and I was working to restore this company. And I kind of came at a crossroads at like 3 a.m. And it was either to restore the executive, individual, the CEO, or restore the file shares and get so the next day the rest of the company could come in and they can all work. And I had no one else that I can rely on and ask these questions. And I made the decision, and I try to weigh out the pros and cons here. And I said, well, let me go ahead and get the rest of the company working, and this individual will have to wait. Well, it was like 4 a.m, 5 a.m, and I started going home, and I get this call, and the client was calling because they were very upset because they had came in early to get work done because the prior day everyone was cryptoed and they couldn't work. And I told them, that at first they were just yelling at me, but I told them the crossroads and the decision I had to come to. I don't know if they were still happy with it, but I would have to say the advice here is, at the end of the day, I had to make a decision, and you have to own these decisions, and you have to try to make what's the best decision. When you're making, especially these decisions for entire companies, I think it's important to just take a moment, take a breath, get all the facts, and try to make the best decision to your knowledge at the time. And then you really just have to own it. You have to, I think it's not the best, but I had to present my findings and present the reasons why I did this. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to take, your accountability for anything that you're doing and all your decisions that you're making in your day to day.
Wise. That's wise. You've learned a thing or two because you've seen a thing or two, is what it sounds like.
Yeah. I think the most important thing in any industry, not just IT, is taking accountability. So like I said, I've made tons of mistakes in IT. I've deleted some stuff in prod accidentally thinking that I was in dev. And the thing is you have to own up to your mistakes, because then everyone can just move past it. We can all work together and get through it. But the worst is when, someone's saying, well, I didn't do this. And then you have to try to figure out what really happened, and then you're spending all this time and resources and trying to figure out something. But I have much more respect for people that are like, hey, I did this. I screwed up. How are we going to get through this and get over this? And, then you take it as a learning experience.
I've never met anyone that I'd want to work with that doesn't have that approach of honesty being important.
Yeah.
I mean, as everyone I talk to at any kind of decent place to work, that's the mindset, is you have to be honest. It's okay. We're all going to make mistakes. It's not a super blameful culture where we're going to just roast you all day. We're here to move on, and we've likely made mistakes in the past as well. So we can relate to that.
I wish I could say the same. Where I've worked at I've worked with a couple individuals where they're, just total don't want to take the accountability. So, but I would agree. Most people are taking the accountability. They understand we've all been there.
Yep. Gosh, if you're working at a place that's going to roast you for admitting that you did something wrong, good luck to you.
Yeah.
Maybe freshen up that resume. All right. Next question. With your knowledge now, what one tip would you give your younger self? So young Bradley, he's watching, back in time. What advice do you have for him?
For my younger self, I would have to say that patience is key. I changed jobs several times. I was in the help desk for a long time, and I think it's a very big hurdle to go from help desk to, let's say, project engineer or whatever your company may call it. And I changed jobs and tried to change jobs during my time when I felt that I was done, with the help desk. Help desk is, in my opinion, a very thankless, very hard job. We're all thanking them in the industry, but you're dealing with customers that are irate, and they just don't understand what your day to day is. So with that, I changed jobs, trying and going to different companies, and they would say, "Oh, let's circle back in 6 months." You're pretty close to project material, or so on and so forth. And I think it would have been better for me to just stay, calm down, have a little patience, and then I think I should have just stayed at the company, moved to projects, and been a lot happier. I think I spent a lot longer time on the help desk and doing those type of roles than if I just had a little more patience and waited it out. Because no company, like I said, it's a big hurdle, and no company really wants to take that leap of faith when you don't have a track record in that, in that practice.
Yeah. Gosh, you're wise, man. You got some good advice.
Well, good. I'm glad. Learn from my mistakes,
That's the way to do it. Learn from other people's mistakes. That was a big transition I tried to make in my life. Was I don't need to see this all firsthand anymore. I have made plenty myself. Let's try and learn just a little bit from the suffering of others, and it'll go a long way at reducing the suffering. But some people to mess around and find out, as they say. All right. What are 3 of your favorite modules all time?
All time. Oh My Posh would be the first one. And, it doesn't do the most things, but what it does do, it does really well, in theming your terminal. I used it in Windows. I use it on my Mac. It's really just one of those quality of life things that I just love to have in all my PowerShell profiles. So I really love that one. Microsoft.graph, probably the biggest one I'm in day to day. I just love it. Even though I'm using a lot more invoke REST methods, so I'm not really needing Microsoft.graph, but it's so beneficial, and it's just really well done. It's very well flushed. And the last one would be by Doug Fink's PSAI now, which I remember, I think I saw a blog post about it where, you're able to talk to AI in your terminal and, query OpenAI just by a PowerShell module. And I thought it was the craziest cool thing. And I played around with it. And I'm trying to integrate it more with different scripts, and I'm taking more of a mentality when I'm going through different automations, being like, can I use AI or PSAI to help here? And if so, how? So I think that's a really a good one as well.
Sweet. Good answer. All right. Microsoft.graph. So why are you using invoke REST method and calling the endpoints yourself rather than using the module? Just curious.
Mostly, like I said, I'm lazy. So when I'm putting the automations in, and let's say like an Azure function or runbook, I don't want to have to take that extra step. Yeah. So I'll just do the invoke REST method.
That works. I like that approach too.
Yeah. So again, it's just laziness.
The lazy administrator right here. You can find him at thelazyadministrator.com. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. So people have loved you. They've listened this whole time. Oh my gosh, they're taking up all the wisdom. They want to connect with you further. Obviously, we got thelazyadministrator.com, which they can check out. But is there anywhere else on the internet people should be finding you and connecting with you?
I don't really have that huge of an internet footprint, no social media. I would have to say, you can email me, Brad at the Lazy Administrator, but I'm no longer on Twitter or X or whatever you call it. I'm not on Facebook. Really, I'm more behind the scenes, just reading everyone's PowerShell blogs. But contact form on my blog, that'll reach my email as well. And some people reach me on Telegram. I forget what I had set up one because so many people had reached out to me. I think it was like bradwyatt.me, I think it is, or bradleywyatt.me, but that'll just shoot you straight into my Telegram as well. Because a lot of the times people, if they need help with any of my blog posts, I just say, hey, reach out to me on Telegram. I'm always there.
That's cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Sometimes you might be able to find me in the Discord. So I am there, but I'm usually just creeping. Yes. So I'm there, but I'm mostly just reading.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much, Bradley. And thank you out there for joining us and listening. If you enjoyed what you heard today, leave us a 5-star review, a comment, a like, a subscribe, whatever you got going on. We appreciate it. Share this episode with a friend. You have a friend breaking in, maybe a dropout that could use a little bit of advice from Bradley? Well, send it to him. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you, Bradley. Appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.